Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Butchered at the Abandoned Asylum by Sara Bourgeois. Narrated by Meghan Kelly. Chapter 1. I squinted at the glowing screen before me, the lines of code blurring together as the clock on my desk ticked past midnight. The house was silent, save for the soft hum of my computer and the occasional creak of the old floorboards settling. My fingers flew across the keyboard, tapping out a rhythmic staccato as I worked to debug a particularly stubborn section of code. The submission cutoff bore down on me, and as usual, the burden of duty hung like a millstone around my neck. I paused, rubbing my eyes and leaning back in my chair. The dim light of my desk lamp cast spooky shadows across the room. It reminded me of how alone I was at the moment. I pictured my sisters, Lovage and Angelica, lost in peaceful dreams by this hour, their carefree rest a world apart from my late-night vigil. A notification popped up on my screen. Another email from a colleague halfway across the world. I sighed, clicked it open, and scanned its contents. More work, more expectations to meet. The quiet of the house seemed to amplify my thoughts. I had to wonder if this was how it would always be. Me, alone with my work, while life passed by outside these four walls. I stood up, stretched my stiff muscles, and walked over to the window. The streetlights cast a warm glow on the empty sidewalk below. For a moment, I imagined what it might be like to be out there, carefree and unburdened. But that wasn't me. I was the responsible one, the big sister, the one who got things done. I turned back to my desk. The code wouldn't debug itself, and I had a job to do. As I settled back into my chair, I caught a glimpse of a family photo on my bookshelf. My sisters' smiling faces looked back at me, a reminder of why I pushed myself so hard. They needed me to be the strong one, the dependable one. I took a deep breath, cracked my knuckles, and dove back into the sea of code. The night stretched on, silent and unyielding, as I worked in solitude. I'd been staring at the screen for hours, my eyes burning from the strain. Just as I was about to call it a night, another email notification pinged. Normally, I'd ignore it, because I really needed to go to bed. But something compelled me to check. It wasn't work-related. Instead, it was an alert from the local Nextdoor page. Curiosity got the better of me, and I clicked the link, desperate for any distraction from the endless lines of code. The page loaded, revealing a flurry of recent posts. My brow furrowed as I read the titles. Strange lights at Rosehill. Unexplained noises from the asylum. Anyone else hear that scream last night? I scrolled through the comments. Each one was more unsettling than the last. Neighbors reported seeing eerie floating lights drifting past the asylum's broken windows. Others swore they heard inhumane wails echoing across the grounds in the dead of night. One post caught my eye. A local jogger claimed to have seen a shadowy figure moving behind the cracked glass of a second-floor window. When he looked again, it was gone. Rosehill Asylum had been abandoned for years. The restoration project had only just begun, and as far as I knew, no one should be there after dark. My logical mind tried to rationalize the reports. Trick of the light, overactive imaginations, maybe even local teens playing pranks. But the sheer number of accounts was hard to dismiss. I found myself staring at the old family photo on my bookshelf again. My sisters' smiling faces seemed to hold a silent question. What would they make of these strange occurrences? Part of me wanted to dismiss it all, to close the laptop and finally go to bed. I shook my head and tried to clear away the fantastical thoughts. But it was of no use. I knew the supernatural was real, and I knew that sometimes it was dangerous. Perhaps it was time someone investigated these reports properly and approached the situation with a clear, analytical mind. I stared at the next door page. The reports of strange occurrences at Rosehill Asylum gnawed at me. My first instinct was to grab my jacket and head out immediately. After all, if something genuinely sinister was happening, every moment counted. But the rational part of my brain, the part that had gotten me this far in life, urged caution. It was the middle of the night. Investigating an abandoned asylum, alone in the dark, was the kind of reckless behavior I'd expect from Angelica, not me. I glanced at the clock, which read 2:37 a.m. The sensible thing would be to wait until morning, when I could see clearly, and maybe even bring backup. But what if whatever was happening at Rosehill didn't follow a convenient 9-to-5 schedule? I rubbed my temples. Shouldn't I act now if there was even a chance that something dangerous was lurking at Rosehill? But rushing in unprepared could be just as dangerous. What if I got hurt, or worse? Who would look after Lovage and Angelica then? What would happen to Aunt Hecate without me to take care of her? I paced my room, torn between action and caution. The logical part of me argued for a measured approach. Gather information, make a plan, and investigate in daylight. But another part, a part I usually kept tightly reined in, whispered of urgency and unseen dangers growing stronger in the night. My eyes fell on the family photo again. What would my sisters say if they knew I was considering this? Lovage would probably urge caution, while Angelica would be halfway out the door already. I took a deep breath. The town needed someone level-headed to look into this, and someone who could approach the situation rationally. But did it need to be tonight, right now? I stood in the hallway, my hand hovering over Lovage's doorknob. The house creaked around me, as if urging me to reconsider my plan. With a soft sigh, I turned the knob and peered inside. Lovage lay curled up in her bed, her blonde hair splayed across the pillow. She looked so peaceful, so unburdened. I couldn't bring myself to wake her and drag her into this potential mess. I closed her door gently and moved on to Angelica's room. As expected, my youngest sister was sprawled across her bed, one leg dangling off the side, her purple hair a tangled mess. A half-finished painting sat on her easel. The brushes were still wet. Finally, I approached Aunt Hecate's room. I braced myself, expecting to find her in one of her restless states. To my surprise, she was sound asleep, her face serene. The moonlight streaming through the window gave her an almost ethereal glow. I couldn't disturb this moment of tranquility. The decision was made, and I retreated to my room. If I was going to do this, I needed to be prepared. I pulled out my sturdy backpack from the closet and began gathering supplies. First, the practical items: a flashlight, extra batteries, a first aid kit, and a bottle of water. Then, my laptop and a portable charger. You never know when you might need to access information quickly. Next came the magical tools. I hesitated for a moment before opening the bottom drawer of my desk. Inside lay a collection of items I rarely used, but always kept close. A small leather-bound grimoire, a pouch of protective herbs, a set of runestones, and a silver pendant imbued with a shielding charm. I packed everything carefully, making sure nothing clinked or rustled. Then I made my way downstairs. I stood in the kitchen, pen hovering over a notepad. What could I write that wouldn't make my sisters panic? After a moment's hesitation, I scribbled, "Gone to check on something. Don't worry, back soon. S." It felt inadequate, but anything more detailed would only raise questions I couldn't answer right now. I placed the note on the kitchen counter in front of the coffee pot, where they'd be sure to see it if they got up early. With one last glance around the silent house, I slipped out the front door and locked it behind me. The cool night air hit my face, and I took a deep breath of it. My car sat in the driveway, a reliable presence in the uncertain night. I climbed in, tossed my backpack onto the passenger seat, and started the engine. The drive to Rosehill Asylum wasn't long, but each minute felt stretched. Streetlights flashed by, creating an eerie strobe effect that did nothing to calm my nerves. I gripped the steering wheel tighter and forced myself to focus on the task at hand. What was the best way to approach this? I couldn't just waltz in through the front door, assuming it wasn't chained shut. Perhaps I could slip through a back entrance or a broken window. But then, breaking and entering wasn't exactly my style. What if someone saw me? How would I explain that to the authorities? I tried to rationalize away some of my doubts. This was necessary. Something was happening at Rosehill, and I really wanted to find out what. As I drove, I mentally cataloged the contents of my backpack. The flashlight would be crucial. I'd need to be able to see without drawing too much attention. The protective herbs and runestones could come in handy if something supernatural was at play. And if it turned out to be nothing more than some kids playing pranks, well, at least I'd be prepared for anything. The road curved, and suddenly Rosehill Asylum loomed before me, a dark silhouette against the night sky. I slowed the car. The abandoned building looked even more imposing up close. Its broken windows were like empty eye sockets staring down at me. I pulled over to the side of the road, just out of sight of the main entrance. After I killed the engine, I sat in a sudden silence, my eyes fixed on the looming silhouette of Rosehill Asylum. The building stood like a dark sentinel against the night sky. Its broken windows looked like gaping, toothless mouths. Moonlight cast eerie shadows across its weathered facade. It created the illusion of movement where there should be none. I stepped out of the car, the crunch of gravel under my feet sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. The cool night air raised goosebumps on my skin as I shouldered my backpack and began the trek towards the asylum. With each step, the building seemed to grow larger and more imposing. The restoration scaffolding created strange angular shadows that shifted as I moved, making me jump at nothing more than tricks of the light. I chided myself for being so jumpy, but I couldn't shake the growing anxiety that settled in the pit of my stomach. As I drew closer, details emerged from the darkness. Ivy crawled up the walls as nature slowly reclaimed what man had abandoned. Graffiti marred the lower levels, reminding me that I might not be the only one drawn to this place after dark. The main entrance loomed before me, a set of heavy wooden doors hanging askew on rusted hinges. Yellow caution tape fluttered in the breeze, a half-hearted attempt to keep trespassers at bay. I hesitated, and was suddenly acutely aware of how alone I was. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant hoot of an owl. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back and to return to the safety and warmth of my home. Skirting around the main entrance, I began a careful circuit of the asylum's exterior. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness and revealed crumbling brickwork and overgrown vegetation. Every few steps, I paused and listened intently for any signs of movement or unusual sounds. As I rounded the eastern corner of the building, something caught my eye. At first, I dismissed it as more graffiti, but as I drew closer, I realized it was far more intricate. Carved into the weathered stone were a series of symbols. Their lines seemed too precise to be the work of bored teenagers. I ran my fingers over the etched surface and felt the deliberate grooves. They formed a pattern that tugged at the edges of my magical knowledge. I'd seen similar symbols before, in the dusty tomes of old grimoires, but never arranged quite like this. Moving on, I discovered more symbols scattered across the asylum's exterior. Some were carved into the stone, others painted in what looked disturbingly like dried blood. My apprehension grew with each new discovery. Near the back of the building, I stumbled upon something that made my blood run cold. A circle of candles, their wax still soft, surrounded a crude altar made of stacked stones. Atop the altar lay the remains of what appeared to be a small animal. Its body was twisted unnaturally. I swallowed hard and fought back a wave of nausea. This was no teenage prank or urban explorer's camp. Someone had been performing rituals here. I circled back towards the front of the asylum, my mind chewing on my discoveries. The symbols, the altar, the sacrificed animal, all pointed to a level of occult activity far beyond what I'd initially suspected. I stood before the asylum's main entrance. The heavy wooden doors loomed before me. I knew I should turn back, and that entering this decrepit building alone was the height of foolishness. But the evidence of occult activity outside gnawed at me. It demanded further investigation. My hand hovered over the door handle, trembling slightly. I thought of my sisters back home, blissfully unaware of where I was. What would they think if they knew what I was about to do? Lovage would fret, while Angelica would probably be jealous she wasn't here herself. I closed my eyes and dragged a deep breath into my lungs. I was the responsible one, the logical one. I shouldn't be here, and yet I couldn't walk away. Not when there was a chance something truly dangerous was happening within these walls. And my intuition kept telling me that something was going on. With a soft groan, the door swung open at my touch. The musty smell of decay assaulted my nostrils as I stepped inside. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness and revealed peeling wallpaper and debris-strewn floors. Each step echoed in the empty hallway, making me wince. I moved cautiously, hyper-aware of every creak and groan of the building around me. The beam of my flashlight danced across shattered windows and crumbling plaster, creating grotesque shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. I paused at an intersection, considering my options. To my left, a staircase led to the upper floors. To my right, there was a long corridor stretched into the darkness. Straight ahead, I saw a set of double doors that stood slightly ajar. My logical mind suggested I start with the ground floor and work my way up. But something tugged at me. There was an inexplicable pull towards those partially open doors. Against my better judgment, I found myself moving forward, drawn by an unseen force. As I approached, I noticed more symbols etched into the wood. They were similar to those I'd seen outside. I reached out to push the door open further. The musty smell of decay intensified as I stepped into what appeared to be an old common room. My flashlight beam revealed overturned furniture, shattered glass, and walls covered in peeling paint and graffiti. Every nerve in my body felt electrified. The silence was oppressive and was broken only by the occasional groan of the building settling. I held my breath, straining to hear any sound that might indicate I wasn't alone. As I moved deeper into the room, my foot crunched on something. I aimed my flashlight down, revealing scattered pill bottles and syringes. Did squatters leave them, or were they from the time the asylum still housed patients? The air felt heavy, almost thick, with an unseen presence. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, though my rational mind insisted it was just paranoia. Still, my fingers tightened around the protective charm in my pocket. My flashlight caught something glinting in the corner. As I approached, I realized it was a broken mirror. My reflection stared back at me, distorted and fragmented. For a split second, I could have sworn I saw something else in the mirror, a shadow, a figure behind me, but when I blinked, it was gone. I turned away quickly, my pulse pounding in my temples. The room suddenly felt smaller and more claustrophobic. Shadows seemed to dance at the edge of my vision, retreating whenever I tried to focus on them. A soft scraping sound from above made me freeze. It could have been the wind or a small animal, but it sounded deliberate, almost beckoning. I took a deep breath. Well, as deep as I could, considering how the air was full of dust, mold, and the stench of rotting things. But as I stood in that decaying room, surrounded by the remnants of countless shattered lives, logic felt very far away. My senses were on high alert. The sudden faint scent of something burning stung my nose and then vanished like a ghost. The taste of dust in the air coated my tongue and irritated my throat. The prickle of goosebumps on my skin. Everything felt heightened, more intense. I moved towards the doorway on the far side of the room. My footsteps echoed in the eerie silence. As I reached for the handle, a cold draft whispered across my face, carrying with it a faint, indecipherable whisper. I pushed open the door. The room beyond was bigger. Its high ceiling was lost in shadows. My flashlight beam swept across the space and revealed what appeared to be an old cafeteria. Long tables, some overturned, others still standing in eerie rows, filled the room. But it wasn't the tables that caught my attention. In the center of the room, a large circle had been drawn on the floor. Candle stubs dotted its perimeter. Their wax drippings formed grotesque patterns on the cracked linoleum. Within the circle, strange symbols had been painted in a dark, rusty substance that I desperately hoped wasn't blood. I approached cautiously. As I got closer, I noticed small objects scattered around the circle, bones, feathers, and what looked like dried herbs. I crouched down to examine the symbols more closely and was careful not to touch anything. They seemed to twist and writhe as if alive. The precision of the symbols, the careful arrangement of the ritual components, this was the work of someone who knew what they were doing. Another soft scraping sound made me whirl around, and my heart leapt into my throat. But it was just a piece of paper caught in a draft skittering across the floor. I let out a shaky breath, trying to calm my nerves. As I stood, something on one of the tables caught my eye. I moved closer, shining my flashlight on the object. It was a book, its leather cover cracked and worn with age. My curiosity overrode my caution, and I reached out to open it. The pages were filled with handwritten notes and diagrams, some in languages I didn't recognize. But what I could read was enough. Rituals for summoning, binding, and controlling supernatural entities. Demons, to be more specific. Spells that promised power beyond imagination, and warnings of the terrible price such power demanded. I closed the book because it felt like the words in it were trying to scrape their way under my skin. I knew I should leave and call for help, but something kept me rooted to the spot. Despite the growing fear gnawing at my insides, I knew I needed to see more. I moved cautiously into the next area, my flashlight beam sweeping across the debris-strewn floor. I smelled the scent of mold and something else, something metallic and unpleasant. My stomach churned as I recognized the coppery tang of blood. The room I entered was larger than the others, with rusted metal fixtures lining the walls. Broken tiles crunched under my feet as I stepped further inside. This must have been the water therapy room, I realized, noticing the remnants of large tubs. Something dark caught my eye in the corner, a shape that didn't quite fit with the rest of the room's decay. I approached slowly. As I drew closer, The beam of my flashlight revealed a shoe, then a leg. My breath caught in my throat. I knew I should turn away, call for help, or do anything but move closer. But I couldn't stop myself. The light trembled in my hand as I illuminated the rest of the figure. A man lay sprawled on the floor, his unseeing eyes staring up at the ceiling. Blood pooled around him, soaking into his clothes and spreading across the cracked tiles. I recognized him immediately. Elijah Hargrove, a local historian. My mind reeled, trying to process what I was seeing. Elijah's body was surrounded by candles and strange symbols drawn in what looked horribly like his own blood. This wasn't just a murder, it was some kind of ritual. I stumbled back, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a scream. The room seemed to spin around me as the full horror of what I'd discovered sank in. My mind went blank, unable to process the horror before me. Elijah's lifeless eyes stared accusingly, and I felt my knees buckle. I staggered back, colliding with a dirty tub. The clang echoed through the room and snapped me out of my stupor. My heart threatened to burst from my chest. Bile rose in my throat, and I swallowed hard, fighting the urge to vomit. This couldn't be happening. Not here, not now. I forced myself to take deep breaths and tried to slow my racing pulse. Think, Sage. Think. You're logical, responsible. What do you do now? My hand shook as I reached for my phone, nearly dropping it in my haste. I needed to call 911 and report what I'd found. But as my finger hovered over the emergency call button, a chilling thought struck me. What if whoever did this was still here? The realization hit me like a bucket of ice water. I wasn't safe. I needed to get out, now. I backed away from Elijah's body, my eyes darting around the room, searching for any sign of movement in the shadows. The symbols drawn around him seemed to writhe in the beam of my flashlight, and I felt a surge of magical energy that made my skin crawl. This was more than just a murder. It was something darker that reeked of forbidden magic. The kind of thing that could bring unwanted attention, not just to me, but to my sisters as well. To all the witches of Bone Gap. I weighed my options. Should I call the sheriff and risk exposure, or leave and pretend I never saw this? No, I couldn't just walk away. Whatever was happening here, it was dangerous. More people could get hurt if I didn't act. So I dialed 911 and I reported finding a body at Rosehill Asylum. Even as I disconnected the call, I heard the dispatcher asking me to stay on the line. But I didn't want to talk. I wanted to run. As soon as I hung up, I bolted. I ran through the asylum's decaying halls, no longer caring about stealth or caution. My only thought was to get out and to put as much distance between myself and that horrific scene as possible. Chapter 2. I paced back and forth in front of the asylum, my arms wrapped tightly around myself. The cool night air bit at my skin, but I barely noticed. My mind kept replaying the gruesome scene I'd just witnessed. It was like a horrific movie on an endless loop. Elijah's lifeless eyes, the blood, those strange symbols. It was all too much. I glanced at my phone. How long had it been since I called 911? It felt like hours, but the timestamp on my last call showed only minutes had passed. Where were they? My breath came in short, sharp bursts. I tried to slow it down, to regain some semblance of control, but it was useless. The image of Elijah's body refused to leave my mind. I couldn't believe this was happening again, and by this, I meant another murder. I stopped pacing and leaned against my car, pressing my forehead against the cool metal. What had I stumbled into? This wasn't just a simple murder. Those symbols, the ritual setup, it reeked of dark magic. The kind of stuff my sisters and I had always been warned about. A twig snapped somewhere.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?